You're watching Buzz with Jess Lujan.
Good evening, Guam. I'm Jess Lujan. Welcome to this edition of The Buzz. Very exciting show tonight. We got to have in studio the first elected Attorney General of Guam, Mr. Doug Moylan, my guest tonight, and glad first time here on the Melly Show.
Buenas.
How you doing?
Good, thank you.
I asked you a couple days ago to come on the show. I was reading an article in Pacific Daily News that said, let's embrace our temporary status. There's big talk now, of course, the hospital situation. We got some of our leaders who definitely just are against QCs, and, you know, just for the life of me, why are we against another hospital? Much needed, most especially after we have seen what had happened yesterday in Boston. And again, just our preparing for what may have happened with North Korea. We need more than one hospital. But the fact remains is that the government of Guam, we're looking in every nook and cranny for money. We're in this status. We're a colony, basically. We are one of the last remaining colonies of the United States. We are in a temporary status in regards to our status as a territory, an unincorporated territory. And your article, again, just makes a lot of sense, things I've been talking about, but, you know, as one who was the first elected Attorney General, and you've had conversations with your counterparts in, I guess, the previous administration, and senators and congressmen as well in Washington, D.C. Your thoughts, and again, the genesis behind this article?
Well, Senator, you know, the whole idea is to contribute to the collective ideas on what to do with not only local problems financially, but national now problems. We see sequestration and how throughout our entire society we're having problems financially.
Sure.
But from the Guam's perspective, and interesting how Korea has all of a sudden highlighted throughout Guam's history how important this island is to the national interests. You know, you got the Middle East that they're just worried about Israel and what it could do to the gas prices and so forth. At this part of the world, they're worried about actually hitting the mainland U.S.
Sure.
And I always laugh when they're going that, oh, they're going to hit the mainland U.S. when Korea is always saying Guam, and they don't realize that there's U.S. citizens here, 120,000 U.S. citizens. But my perspective was, in the AG's office, the late Charles Troutman and I would have many discussions about whether Guam, during our time that we were there, would go into bankruptcy. And I remember the analysis was that Guam wouldn't really go to bankruptcy like a state might or a county because we are a territory. And that Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution provides that the Congress shall administer the territories of the United States, which is oftentimes called colonies and stuff like that. The problem is we've remained in this status far too long, since 1898, us being ceded over to the United States through the Spanish-American War. The receiverships that we've been experiencing, it happened after I left office, but we were preparing for what would be the legal argument if Guam government, part of the government, was put into receivership. Where essentially the federal government comes in and says, you can't handle that function anymore, we're going to take it back from you. That's how the Organic Act is set up for Guam. The problem is that when they take it away, we shouldn't be paying for it anymore. Our government collectively as taxpayers. The Department of Interior has been set up by Congress to administer all the territories, insular areas of the United States. And I believe that since we've had the solid waste landfill that was taken over receivership and still in receivership, and you've had the Department of Mental Health, that's going back to the government now. But the taxpayers, and the governor for that matter, and the legislators have had to deal with the draw of all this revenue from the taxpayers because of the inability to grapple.
And therein line, General, is the fact here as well, when the receivership was imposed basically on our landfill, or the dump, and then now, of course, the landfill. I think for about a month or so, the government of Guam is paying to the tune of $1 million a week to the federal receiver, not taking in consideration, again, the fact that we have other entities in the government of Guam that we need to fund, like schools, like hospitals, and all that. Now, that's where the legislature and the governor comes in and says, well, hey, I have to balance this out. But the federal receiver at this point says, hey, I don't care. This is what comes in. So everything else can go to the wayside, but the dump has got to stay.
Right. Many times there were the threats. The federal court orders that were coming out saying that you either pay this or we're going to take it out of your accounts and things like that. Well, the analysis has to go further from the attorneys that are involved there, that we are not a state. We are a territory. Therefore, when the function is taken away, it must go to the federal government. In the bond case that was went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices referenced the fact that they did not want the federal taxpayer covering debts that the government of Guam
incurred.
Okay. And they specifically took that Organic Act and saw the language in it. And I'm saying that for purposes of our hospital, of course we don't want to give up things that we could afford ourselves, but the U.S. has opened up immigration. They have increased the burden upon our local residents, who are taxpayers, to fund federal decisions that were made 7,000, 8,000 miles away. So my feeling is that the politicians should start a dialogue with the Obama administration and Department of Interior, the President himself, Congress oversight of Guam, and start letting them know that we cannot financially manage this hospital.
And you're right about that, General, in the fact that when you're talking about opening borders, our borders are open based on the Compact Impact Agreement that the federal government signed with the Compact Impact States.
Which we had no
say-so, and they were supposed to reimburse us. I mean, on an annual basis, we're supposed to give in basically the invoice on how much services and things like that have been rendered. And at one point, we were getting X amounts, but now because the states have been complaining, Hawaii and I think Arkansas have been complaining as well. So now we're splitting that money that once went to us exclusively.
It's interesting that you say that. The states are complaining that they have a sovereignty under the 14th Amendment. They have to stand on their own, whether they like it or not. Guam is not our local government's responsibility. In fact, it's the responsibility of the Department of Interior. You know, this construct that we call the government of Guam is just made up on a piece of paper that can change tomorrow based upon people in Congress. The idea was that Guam has to change its political status. You know, at some point we need to change from a territory to some other status, whether it be a state or, you know, wherever we want to go.
Independent or free association at this point, those are the three options.
We've reduced ourselves. And we had a discussion earlier about Lulan Bettis, the Commission on Self-Determination, I think it was called. We need to get before the United Nations and start using other countries to push our decision-making ability for the people on Guam to decide what their political future is going to be. And until they do that, then things like the hospital, where we can ill afford to continue funding it, should be the department, not to stop a general hospital. We still need to help those that need the help. But the funding should be coming from the federal government. And literally, the federal government might just take it over. Now, the senators should be talking in terms of, do we want the new hospital to participate in the bid to run the GMH? Do we want to open it up to, you know, whoever else is out there that might want to take over GMH, including every person that would be eligible, the indigents, the Commonwealth people, things like that, the Micronesians, those sorts of categories.
I'll tell you what, we've got to take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk more about this. We'll be right back.